The auditorium went dead silent when the spotlight cut. Right as Kyla, the only black performer, placed her fingers on the piano. Her mic was dead, her sheet music gone, and the principal whispered to another student, "Let's see if she still thinks she belongs here." But in the front row, a billionaire sat forward, eyes narrowed. Why was he suddenly watching her so closely? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Northbridge High Auditorium had been transformed into something unrecognizable, draped in gold fabric and artificial pine. The kind of decoration that tried too hard to look warm while quietly reminding everyone who belonged there. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors, and the audience, parents, donors, local officials, settled into velvet seats with an air of expectation. This was the Holiday Gala, the most prestigious event the school hosted all year, where talent was supposed to shine and futures were quietly decided. But long before the first note was played, the hierarchy of whose talent mattered had already been established. Backstage, Kyla Monroe sat alone on a folding chair, her hands resting lightly on her lap, fingers flexing out of habit. Music had always lived in her body, not just her mind. She didn't need a piano in front of her to feel the rhythm. It moved through her even now, steady and patient, waiting for permission to exist. She wore a simple emerald dress her mother had altered herself, careful stitching done late at night after long shifts at the hospital. It wasn't flashy, it didn't sparkle under harsh lights, but it fit Kyla perfectly, like something honest in a room full of performance. Pinned to the bulletin board near the stage entrance was the final program. Kyla had already looked at it 3 times, each time hoping she had misread it before. Her name was there, technically, but it was last. Not a headliner, not even near the middle, tacked on after the choir reprise and before the closing announcements. Students she knew, students whose musical abilities she had quietly helped refine during lunch breaks, were listed above her. Their pieces were described with flattering language, soulful, captivating, a crowd favorite. Kyla's performance was simply labeled, piano solo. No description, no anticipation. Mrs. Lindell moved briskly through the backstage area, clipboard in hand, heels clicking with authority. She stopped briefly in front of Kyla, glanced down, and offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're closing the night," she said, as if it were a gift, "so let's keep it concise. We're already running long." Kyla looked up. "I was told I'd have a full 7 minutes." Mrs. Lindell sighed, the sound sharp and practiced. "Plans change. 5 minutes should be enough for your style." She didn't wait for a response before walking away. Nearby, laughter erupted as 2 other students took selfies, in their glittering outfits, basking in the attention of teachers, fussing over them. One of them caught Kyla's eye, and gave an awkward half-smile, the kind that acknowledged discomfort without challenging it. Kyla looked away. She had learned early that eye contact didn't always mean connection. Out in the audience, Denise Monroe sat near the back, her coat folded neatly over her lap. She had arrived early, not because she expected good seats, but because she wanted to watch her daughter walk into the room without rushing, without feeling like she didn't belong. Denise scanned the program, her brow tightening as she found Kyla's name, last. Again, she exhaled slowly, reminding herself to stay calm. This night wasn't about her anger, it was about Kyla's moment. The gala began as expected. Applause came easily, generously for performances that were pleasant but safe. Teachers beamed from the wings, phones were raised, flashes flickered. Each act was introduced with enthusiasm, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes undeserved. Kyla listened from backstage, the muffled sound of applause pressing against her chest like a reminder of how close she was to something she was never fully allowed to touch. As the evening stretched on, the room grew restless. People checked watches, coats were shifted, whispers floated through the aisles. Kyla stood when she heard the choir's final note fade, knowing her turn was near. She smoothed her dress, took one steady breath, and walked toward the stage entrance. Mrs. Lindell intercepted her. "Quick reminder," she said quietly, her smile fixed. "We don't need anything too heavy. It's Christmas." Kyla nodded, though something twisted inside her. Her piece wasn't heavy. It was honest. There was a difference. She stepped past Mrs. Lindell, before she could say anything else. The MC announced her name with a slight hesitation, mispronouncing Monroe despite having known her for years. A few claps followed, scattered and polite. Kyla walked onto the stage, the grand piano waiting under the glow of the overhead lights. For a moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe this was still enough. that maybe the music would speak louder than everything else. She sat, adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and then the lights went out. Not the entire auditorium, just the stage. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as Kyla froze, her fingers hovering inches above the keys. The piano before her disappeared into shadow, her emerald dress swallowed by darkness. From where she sat, she could still see the audience, their faces faintly illuminated, confusion spreading slowly like ink in water. Someone laughed nervously. Somewhere backstage, a voice muttered about a technical issue. Kyla turned her head slightly, searching for reassurance, but saw only silhouettes shifting behind the curtain. The spotlight flickered once, briefly illuminating her face, then vanished again. Seconds stretched. Each one felt deliberate. Kyla swallowed, her heart pounding loud enough that she was sure someone could hear it. She had practiced performing under pressure, under scrutiny, under doubt, but not like this. Not erased in front of everyone. Her instinct was to stand, to ask for the lights, to demand fairness. But she didn't. She stayed seated, spine straight, hands still poised. From the back row, Denise felt her chest tighten. She half stood, ready to say something, anything, but stopped when she saw Kyla lift her chin. There was something in her daughter's stillness that commanded patience, even in the face of humiliation. A stagehand finally appeared, whispering to Mrs. Lindell, who shrugged and gestured vaguely, as if this inconvenience were beneath her concern. The MC cleared his throat into the microphone, which notably still worked. Folks, just a quick pause. Minor lighting issue. Minor. The word echoed in Kyla's mind as she waited, the silence pressing down on her. She could feel the weight of every eye, every unspoken judgment. This was supposed to be her moment. Instead, it was becoming a lesson, one she knew too well about how easily her excellence could be dimmed. The lights did not come back on, and Kyla realized, with a sudden clarity that chilled her, that this wasn't a mistake at all. A breathless hush clung to the auditorium as the darkness wrapped itself around Kyla like a second skin. Her hands trembled ever so slightly above the piano keys, the icy silence louder than any microphone could have projected. The spotlight should have bathed her in gold, drawing every eye to the brilliance that had taken years to shape. But instead she sat shrouded in shadow, invisible in a room that had been built to celebrate visibility. A technician scurried onto stage, casually checking cables with the urgency of someone who had been told not to rush. His movements were deliberate, slow, almost performative, and Kyla watched his hands move toward the back of the piano, but not toward the source of the problem. Whispers swelled like waves in the crowd. Parents leaned into one another. Students whispered behind programs. Confusion passed through the auditorium like a virus. But backstage there was no confusion. Mrs. Lindell stood with arms crossed, speaking quietly to Vice Principal Harrows. Her lips curled with a knowing smirk as she tilted her head toward the stage. Harrows nodded once, barely looking up. Their conversation wasn't alarmed. It was satisfied. Kyla couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She felt their intent, heavy and sharp as broken glass beneath her. Then, just as suddenly as the blackout had started, the lights returned. Partially, a dim wash illuminated the stage. Not the spotlight she had seen on every other performer, but a low, unfocused glow that barely reached her face. And worse, her microphone was still dead. She glanced at the small amp box connected to the grand piano, and noticed the cord dangling loosely, clearly unplugged. Her mouth parted slightly in shock. This wasn't an accident. It was designed, quietly, deliberate. Kyla Monroe, the MC repeated, clearly unsure what was happening now, the script in his hand becoming useless. Performing an original piece titled, Frozen Echoes. Echoes, she corrected under her breath, though no one could hear her. She drew in a breath and pressed her fingers to the keys anyway. Her body moved with the confidence of countless rehearsals, but inside her chest felt like it was collapsing. The first notes emerged without amplification, soft and fragile. They didn't travel far past the first few rows. A few in the crowd leaned forward, trying to catch the melody, while others settled back, already disengaging. Kyla played through it anyway. Her face was still, but her hands revealed everything: resilience, anger, fear, and most of all, defiance. Every note she played was a challenge to the silence around her. She wasn't here to perform for their approval anymore. She was here because her art demanded space. Even when it was denied, even if they tried to erase her note by note, she would draw herself back into existence. From the back of the auditorium, Griffin Leary watched with narrowed eyes. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he didn't blend in with the Belridge elite. despite their efforts to claim him as a symbol of their diverse success stories. He had grown up in Louisiana, one of 5 kids raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings and taught him that silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. Leary wasn't used to being ignored, and he never ignored discomfort. What he saw on that stage wasn't a technical glitch, it was strategic exclusion, and it looked all too familiar. The audience clapped politely at the end of Kyla's performance. A few seconds of sparse applause that sounded more like obligation than appreciation. Kyla stood, bowed with grace, and walked off stage without waiting for acknowledgement. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside her, something sharp had splintered. She didn't cry, not yet, but she felt the tears waiting, lurking behind her ribs like ghosts. Behind the curtain, Mrs. Lindell gave her a clipped nod. "Nice effort," she said without making eye contact. "Next time, maybe something more festive." Kyla didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice not to break. Instead, she walked past the other performers who avoided her eyes. One of them, Amanda Fraser, murmured, "You were amazing," but didn't say it loud enough for anyone else to hear. Kyla heard it anyway, and it hurt more than if she had said nothing at all. Denise waited for her in the hallway near the side exit, holding Kyla's coat and looking like she was trying not to scream. "What happened?" she asked. "That wasn't a mistake." "No," Kyla said quietly. "It wasn't." She didn't offer more. She didn't have to. Back in the auditorium, the gala continued. Speeches. A final group photo. Praise for the event's success. Leary didn't stay for the end. He stood up, walked out the side door, and pulled out his phone. There were rules about donor engagement, but Griffin had never cared much for rules that protected bias. He typed a name into his notes app, Kyla Monroe, and underlined it twice. What no one noticed in that moment was the quiet click of a cell phone camera from the balcony. A blurry video of the darkened stage, Kyla's barely audible performance, and the crowd's confused expressions had just been recorded by someone unexpected. A student, half hidden behind a holiday wreath, uploaded it without any caption. Just the performance, just the truth. And by the time Kyla sat in the passenger seat of her mother's car, the video had already been shared 27 times. But by morning, that silent video would explode into a firestorm that no one at Northbridge High was prepared for. And not even Kyla knew it had been posted. The next morning broke with a kind of quiet that felt deceptive. Snow layered the streets of Belridge like untouched sugar, the kind of winter softness that made the town look more innocent than it ever truly was. Inside the Monroe household, the morning routine had begun like any other, until Kyla's phone, left charging on her nightstand, buzzed once, then twice, then it didn't stop. When she finally picked it up, the screen was flooded. Mentions, tags, DMs, text from classmates she barely spoke to. She stared at the notification count, hundreds within an hour. Her fingers hovered over the screen, as if touching it might change everything. And in a way, it already had. The video. Someone had posted it. Not just footage from the gala, but her performance the moment the spotlight failed, the mic died, the piano sound dropped into silence, and most of all, the expression on her face as she played through it anyway, refusing to stop even as the sabotage suffocated her stage. The caption was chillingly simple. They tried to mute her, but they couldn't stop the music. By noon, the video had reached Twitter's trending page. Kyla Monroe, Silent Symphony, and Northbridge cover-up bounced between TikTok and Instagram. Influencers shared it with dramatic voiceovers. Activists reposted it with angry commentaries. A famous R&B singer called Kyla the embodiment of black brilliance under pressure. Everyone had something to say, except the people who had caused it. Denise stood behind her daughter as she scrolled. Her eyes were puffy from a sleepless night, but her voice was clear. "Did you post it?" Kyla shook her head. "No, I didn't even know someone was recording." They sat in silence as the comments poured in. Thousands of them. Some praising her strength, some condemning the school. Others arguing over whether it was truly racism or just bad luck. The algorithm didn't care. It had chosen its next viral symbol. And Kyla, still in her pajamas, still trying to wrap her head around the shame of the night before, suddenly belonged to the internet. At Northbridge High, the reaction was instant, but fractured. Principal Hardwick called an emergency faculty meeting, demanding the video be handled. He issued a generic press release by noon. "We regret the technical difficulties experienced during last night's holiday gala. We support all of our students equally." It was short, vague, and not enough. Mrs. Lindell, of course, denied everything. "I didn't run the tech. That's not my responsibility," she said to anyone who asked, all while insisting that Kyla's dark piece might not have been suitable for a festive program anyway. Behind closed doors, she referred to Kyla's viral moment as dramatics. She still didn't get it, or didn't want to, but students got it. Teachers whispered in the halls. Some nodded silently at Kyla, unsure what to say but suddenly aware of what they'd ignored. Others stared without subtlety, trying to figure out whether they were supposed to be angry, apologetic, or indifferent. Kyla's name became its own kind of bell. When spoken, it forced everyone to pause. Kyla walked the hallways with a new kind of weight. She hadn't asked for this attention. It didn't feel like empowerment. It felt like exposure. She passed lockers, decorated in holiday glitter, bulletin boards filled with announcements that never mentioned her, and students taking selfies beside the tree in the lobby, while whispers followed her like a shadow. In class, her phone vibrated again. This time it was a message request from someone she didn't recognize. The name was a handle. "I'd justice for Kyla." The message read, "You think this is over? It's only just started." She stared at the screen, unsettled. She didn't respond. At lunch she sat alone near the back of the cafeteria, eyes locked on her tray of barely touched food. That's when someone slid a folded piece of paper onto her tray and walked off. She looked up just in time to catch the back of their jacket. A senior she vaguely recognized from the tech crew, but not someone she knew well. The note was handwritten, in small, neat print. There was no greeting, no name, just one line. "They silenced you once. Don't let them do it again." Kyla's fingers clenched around the paper. Her breath hitched, and for a brief second she looked around to see if anyone was watching. No one made eye contact, but that note wasn't random. It wasn't a prank. It felt like a message from someone who had seen more than just her performance. Someone who knew what was really going on behind the curtain. She folded the note and tucked it into her sleeve. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something sharper, an emerging clarity. This wasn't just about one night. This was about the pattern, the whispers, the way her excellence had been tolerated, but never celebrated. She had been invited to perform, but never truly welcomed. Back in her locker, tucked between textbooks and a worn notebook of sheet music, she found something else. Another piece of paper, this time in a different handwriting. Rougher, rushed. "You're not the first, but you might be the last if you speak loud enough." That one hit harder. It confirmed what she had long suspected but never had proof of. This had happened before. Other students, other moments, other attempts to mute voices that didn't fit the image Northbridge wanted to project. It wasn't just her performance that had been dimmed. It was a system. As she stood staring at the message, the hallway began to feel different, like it was shifting under her feet. She was no longer just a student who played piano. She was a symbol now, whether she liked it or not, and symbols, once awakened, had power. But still, someone was watching her. Someone who knew things she didn't. Someone who had secrets. That night, a second video surfaces, this one from behind the curtain, showing Mrs. Lindell whispering to the technician, just seconds before Kyla's lights went out. The second video was only 31 seconds long, but it cracked the foundation of everything Northbridge had tried to cover. It showed the side of the stage just moments before Kyla's performance. Miss Lindell bending close to a tech crew member, whispering something that made him hesitate, then glanced toward the piano before walking away. No audio, just the image. But the timing was undeniable. It was the moment before the lights cut, before the mic failed, before everything fell silent. By the next morning, the clip had been reposted thousands of times. The internet had already crowned Kyla a victim of racism. But this footage turned suspicion into certainty. The comments sharpened. People demanded firings. Alumni denounced the school. Northbridge High's reputation, once wrapped in holiday charity drives and polished performance brochures, was now bleeding online. Kyla watched it unfold with a numb sort of clarity. The firestorm had moved beyond her, yet everything still revolved around her name. At school, she walked through hallways thick with whispers, some supportive, others bitter. A group of white students passed her locker loudly arguing that it's always about race now, while two younger black girls stared at Kyla like she was a living monument. It felt like she had become something more than herself, and less human because of it. But Kyla wasn't done just reacting. She needed to know who had filmed that first video, the one from the audience that had launched the truth into the world. No one had come forward, and whoever it was hadn't claimed credit, even after the second clip surfaced. It didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Someone was pushing her towards something. She began retracing steps, piecing together who had been where during the gala. She remembered a moment backstage. A flicker of eye contact with someone from the tech booth. Jace Wellington. A quiet senior known more for his silence than anything else. Editor of the yearbook. The kind of student who always sat in the corners of rooms, unnoticed but absorbing everything. Kyla had never spoken more than a sentence to him, but something told her to start there. She found him in the library after lunch, tucked between shelves, typing silently on his laptop. The moment he saw her, he stiffened, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. "I think it was you," Kyla said softly. No accusation in her tone, only truth. Jace hesitated, then slowly closed his laptop. "What makes you think that? You were at the back, near the sound booth. You always carry that old camera, and you don't talk much, but you see everything." He looked down at his hands. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but steady. "They weren't going to change unless someone showed what really happens. I didn't mean for it to blow up like this. I just couldn't watch it happen again." Kyla narrowed her eyes. "Again?"
Jace nodded slowly. "My sister, Camille Wellington. She graduated in 2018. You probably never heard of her. She used to be the lead in every school play. One year she wrote and directed her own production for Black History Month. It was powerful. The administration canceled it 2 days before opening night, said there were scheduling conflicts. But a week later they gave the slot to a Shakespeare adaptation."
Kyla's stomach sank. "And no one said anything?" "She tried," Jace said, "but they isolated her, told her she was misinterpreting things, that she was too emotional, too political. They erased everything she created, and when she fought back, they called her difficult." Kyla sat down across from him, her heart pounding. "So this is a pattern." "It's a system," he replied, "one that survives by making you feel alone." For a moment, neither spoke. Between them, the silence buzzed with unspoken grief. Not just for Kyla or Camille, but for every student who had been made to feel invisible in a place built to showcase talent. Jace reached into his bag and pulled out a thin, worn folder. Inside were printed screenshots, old emails, scanned programs from past events, every one of them subtly showing how students of color were excluded, deprioritized, or mislabeled. "I've been collecting this for years," he said. "At first for Camille, but then I started seeing it happen to others too. You weren't the first, Kyla, but you're the first one people listened to." She ran her hand over the papers, stunned. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because no one would have cared, until it happened on stage. Until the world saw it." It hit Kyla in that moment, just how calculated silence could be. It wasn't just people looking away. It was an architecture of erasure. Subtle, polished, strategic. This wasn't about bad luck or oversight. It was designed. And now that design was exposed, she looked Jace in the eyes, her voice quieter now. "Why are you helping me?" His answer came without pause. "Because the truth matters, and because the ones doing this are still here." Kyla left the library with the folder clutched against her chest. The documents inside were more than proof. They were a roadmap. She wasn't just a viral story. She was a thread pulling apart years of silent harm. And someone had made sure she had what she needed to keep pulling. But just as she reached her locker, heart racing with purpose, she noticed something different. A single red envelope taped to the metal, no name written on it. Inside was a photo, blurry, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed Kyla in Griffin Leary's office building from days before. On the back of the photo, in the same rushed handwriting she'd seen once before, were 6 words: "Careful. They're watching more than you." That same day, Jace's access to the yearbook and student files is suddenly revoked, and Kyla receives an official warning from the school's legal department. Kyla sat across from him in a chair that felt too soft for how heavy her thoughts had grown. Griffin Leary's office overlooked the downtown skyline. All glass and silence. The kind of space that said you were meant to be looked at but never questioned. Yet in this moment, it wasn't the view, the prestige, or even the overwhelming decor that held her still. It was the man himself. Griffin Leary, once a student at Northbridge High, now the CEO of a tech firm valued in the billions, wasn't what she expected. He wasn't performative. He didn't speak in motivational quotes or empty praise. He simply listened, deeply, with a seriousness that made Kyla feel for the first time since the gala, like someone truly believed her without needing proof. "I was in the back row," he said, finally breaking the silence. and I've seen a lot in my life. But what I saw that night, that wasn't a malfunction. That was control disguised as coincidence. Kyla nodded slowly, her palms still pressed against the sides of the leather armrests. It's been happening for years. Just quietly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. Quiet is how systems survive. They don't need to scream when they can whisper you out of existence. Kyla blinked hard, her chest tightening. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to say exactly that out loud. I want to give you something, Leary continued. Every year my foundation hosts a National Youth Arts Gala on Christmas Eve. It's televised, sponsored, watched by people who matter. Politicians, artists, executives. You wouldn't just be a guest, you'd be the closing act. I want you to perform your original composition. Not because you were silenced, but because your talent deserves volume. Kyla's mouth parted slightly. Me? You, he confirmed. I've seen your performance twice now, once in person, and again in silence. And both times I felt it. That's rare. For a moment the idea felt impossible, like a trick her mind was playing just to soften the bruises of the last week. But Leary wasn't offering pity. He was offering a platform, a real one. What about the school? She asked finally. What happens when they find out? They already have, he replied without flinching. And they don't want this for you. Because if you succeed outside their system, you prove they never needed to hold the door for you in the first place. You built your own. Kyla sat back, her heart racing. This wasn't just a stage, it was a shift. And it scared her, not because she wasn't ready, but because she knew how deeply people resented black girls who didn't stay quiet when given crumbs.
Leary slid a contract across the desk. You don't owe me anything, not even a thank you. But if you want this stage, it's yours. Unedited, uncontrolled.
She took it in her hands. The weight of it made her feel like everything that had tried to dim her had only prepared her to stand here, to claim something they never meant for her to have. I'll do it, she whispered. Leary nodded once. Good. Now let's make them watch. But Kyla hadn't even made it back to her car when her phone rang. It was her mother, voice tight with fury. They just delivered a letter. From the school. What? Kyla asked, breath catching in her throat. They've suspended you. What? For what? Violation of the media policy. Denise read aloud. Public behavior causing reputational harm to Northbridge High. Effective immediately. Kyla's feet slowed on the sidewalk as pedestrians blurred past her. The same school that humiliated her, then denied it, had now turned around and punished her for surviving it too visibly. They're scared, she muttered to herself. They're not scared, Denise snapped. They're strategic. They want you to sit back down and say thank you for the scraps. Kyla's hands clenched around her phone. The contract in her bag felt heavier now, not with doubt, but with consequence. Back at school, news of the suspension spread quickly. Some students whispered in shock. Others shrugged like they'd expected it. Jace sent a one-word text. Expected. Kyla didn't reply. She couldn't. Not yet. By the time she reached home, an email had arrived. Official, cold. Denying her access to campus until the situation was evaluated. The words felt sharp, deliberate. She was being cast out as a warning. Later that evening, she sat on the living room floor, her laptop open, the Gala contract beside her. She rewatched her performance again. Not the version that went viral, but a quieter clip Jace had sent directly to her. A close-up. Her hands, her face, the tremble in her fingers when the mic didn't work. The defiance in the way she refused to stop. Every second of that video reminded her that none of this had been gifted. It had been taken, over and over, until she played through the silence and reclaimed it herself. That's when her phone lit up again. Another message. No name. No number. Just one sentence.
They're already building your replacement for next year. Kyla clicks the attached photo and sees a white freshman girl rehearsing her exact piano piece under Mrs. Lindell's supervision.
The official notice from the school framed her suspension as administrative necessity. Words like protocol, policy, and neutral review filled the page, carefully scrubbed of emotion or accountability. But beneath that language was something unmistakably personal. They called her disruptive, not disruptive to learning, not disruptive to safety, disruptive to reputation. As if her very existence, when made visible, posed a threat to the institution's carefully maintained image. At home, Kyla sat at the dining table while Denise paced the kitchen. Phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to reporters she never asked for, and lawyers she never thought she'd need. Kyla listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the grain of the wooden table, remembering how she used to practice piano scales, right there when she was younger, fingers tapping imaginary keys while her mother cooked. Music had always been her refuge. Now it felt like her rebellion. Messages poured in faster than she could read them. Some were gentle and supportive, parents thanking her for standing up, former students sharing stories eerily similar to hers. Others were vicious, accusing her of exaggeration, of playing victim, of trying to cash in on race. One message stood out, short and cutting. If you had just been grateful, none of this would have happened. Kyla deleted it, but the words lingered, echoing something she had heard her whole life in different forms. At Northbridge High, the reaction fractured along predictable lines. A group of students organized a walkout, standing silently outside the school with handmade signs that read, "Let her play and talent has no color." Teachers watched from classroom windows, some with pride, others with discomfort. The administration issued warnings over the loudspeaker, framing the protest as unauthorized disruption. Yet the students didn't move. Silence, they had learned from Kyla, could be powerful when chosen. Inside the building, Mrs. Lindell avoided the front office, slipping through back hallways like someone who knew the walls were closing in. She told colleagues that Kyla had lost control of the narrative, and insisted that rules existed for a reason. But behind closed doors, she was frantic. Emails from alumni donors piled up, some threatening to pull funding unless the school addressed its culture problem. One donor name appeared repeatedly in bold: Griffin Leary. Jace watched the protest from across the street, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His access to the yearbook system had been revoked, and he'd been removed from the tech crew pending review. No one said it outright, but the message was clear: silence or suffer consequences. He typed out a message to Kyla, then erased it, unsure how much she needed encouragement versus space. Finally, he sent one line: "You're not alone. And they know it now." Kyla read it and closed her eyes. For the first time since the gala, she allowed herself to feel something other than control. The injustice wasn't just hers anymore. It had spilled outward, touching people who had been waiting for permission to speak. Local news stations aired segments questioning Northbridge's decision. A panel of commentators debated whether the suspension was appropriate discipline or retaliation masked as policy. The school released another statement, this one firmer, emphasizing that Kyla's actions had violated media conduct guidelines. They still never mentioned the sabotaged performance. Still never admitted fault. That evening, Griffin Leary called. "They're doing exactly what I expected," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Institutions don't correct themselves until the cost of denial becomes too high." "I don't want to hurt anyone," Kyla replied, staring out the window at the quiet street. "I just wanted to play, and that's precisely why this scares them," Leary said. "Because you didn't ask to be loud. You were forced to be." He told her the protests were gaining attention, that sponsors of the upcoming Youth Arts Gala were watching closely, that her suspension had only amplified interest in her performance. "But power always pushes back before it yields," he warned. "Be prepared." The warning came sooner than expected. The next morning, an envelope arrived by courier. No return address. Inside was a single-page letter printed on official letterhead, but not from Northbridge High. It was from the private foundation that managed Kyla's academic scholarship, the one that made attending Northbridge possible in the first place. The language was polite, measured, devastating. "We have been made aware of recent events involving public controversy. While we support artistic expression, we must also consider alignment with our values in institutional partnerships. Further participation in high-profile performances may require re-evaluation of your eligibility." Kyla read it twice, her heart pounding. Re-evaluation, a word that sounded neutral but carried threat in every syllable. Denise grabbed the letter from her hands, reading it with mounting fury. "They're trying to corner you," she said. "They want you to choose between your future and your voice." Kyla sank into a chair, the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. The gala, the protests, the suspension, now this. Every step forward seemed to come with a hand reaching out to pull her back. She thought of the photos she'd seen, the white freshman rehearsing her piece, thought of how easily her work could be repackaged, sanitized, and presented without her. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time the message was blunt. "If you perform at that Christmas gala, your scholarship disappears. This is your only warning." Kyla stared at the screen, breath shallow, pulse racing. The threat was clear now. Not whispered, not implied. Direct. She looked toward the corner of the room where her keyboard sat, silent, but waiting. For the first time, she wondered what it would cost to keep playing, and whether she was ready to pay it. Kyla opens her laptop and sees that the Youth Arts Gala has just announced her as the headlining performer. Publicly, irrevocably, with millions already watching. The days leading up to Christmas felt nothing like a holiday for Kyla Monroe. They felt like a test, one designed to measure how much pressure she could endure before she broke. The announcement of her headlining the Youth Arts Gala had detonated something far bigger than celebration. It exposed fault lines that had existed for years, and now everyone wanted control over the narrative. Northbridge wanted silence, sponsors wanted safety, commentators wanted drama, and Kyla, at the center of it all, was expected to shrink herself so the noise could settle. She woke each morning to a new kind of dread. Not fear exactly, but anticipation, the kind that sits heavy in the chest, waiting for the next blow. Her phone buzzed constantly, supportive messages from strangers mixed with thinly veiled threats. Some warned her to be careful. Others reminded her that opportunities were fragile, easily revoked. One email, sent anonymously but clearly crafted by someone educated and deliberate, read, "You have already made your point. Don't ruin your future by pushing further." Kyla stared at it for a long time before closing her laptop without replying. Outside her home, the protest continued. What started as a handful of students had grown into a movement. Signs lined the sidewalk near Northbridge High, their messages blunt and unapologetic. Let black talent breathe. Silence is violence. You tried to mute her. Cars slowed to watch. Some drivers honked in support. Others shouted insults out their windows, accusing the protesters of exaggeration, of turning a school issue into a race spectacle. The town was split, and Kyla's name was the line drawn straight down the middle. Denise watched it all from the porch, arms crossed tightly against the cold. "They're angry because you didn't stay in the box they built for you," she said quietly when Kyla joined her. "And they're scared because they can't put you back in it." At school, the administration doubled down. Emails were sent reminding students of conduct policies. Teachers were warned against encouraging activism during instructional time. The message was clear: order mattered more than justice. Miss Lindell remained absent from public view, but her influence lingered. Rumors circulated that she was advising the school board behind closed doors, framing Kyla as a talented but volatile student who had lost control of her supporters. Jace felt the consequences firsthand. He was called into the principal's office and told his college recommendations would be reconsidered if he continued to involve himself. When he told Kyla about it, his voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "They're trying to isolate you," he said. "Same tactic they used on my sister. Make everyone afraid to stand next to you." Kyla swallowed hard. "I never wanted anyone else to get hurt." "You didn't hurt anyone," Jace replied. "You exposed something. That's different." The pressure intensified as Christmas Eve approached. Sponsors of the Youth Arts Gala began calling Griffin Leary's foundation, with concerns. Would Kyla's performance overshadow the event? Would protests follow? Would donors pull out? Griffin listened patiently, then made it clear he wasn't backing down. "If your support depends on silence," he told one executive coldly, "then it was never support." But not everyone was as firm. The Scholarship Foundation sent a second letter, this one less polite. It outlined expectations of conduct and reminded Kyla that public controversy could complicate long-term investment. The message between the lines was unmistakable. Perform at the gala, and she risked losing the financial support that made college possible. Denise slammed the letter onto the table, furious. "They're trying to buy your obedience," she said. "That's not opportunity, that's control." Kyla felt torn in a way she'd never experienced before. Music had always been her truth, her escape. Now it was being weaponized against her. She spent long nights at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, unable to play. Every note felt like a decision with consequences far beyond sound. Silence promised safety. The stage promised risk. On social media, the narrative twisted daily. One viral post claimed Kyla was being used by activists. Another accused her of seeking fame. A popular commentator suggested she should take the win and move on. Each take chipped away at the simplicity of her truth. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't chased controversy. She had just played. 2 nights before the gala, Kyla received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost kind. "You're very talented," the woman said, "but talent isn't everything. Timing matters, and right now the smartest thing you could do is step back." "Or what?" Kyla asked quietly. There was a pause. or things get complicated. The line went dead. That night, Kyla sat with Denise at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. What if they take my scholarship? Kyla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I lose everything? Denise reached across the table, gripping her daughter's hands. Then we figure it out. But what you won't do is teach them that threatening a black girl is an effective way to control her. Kyla nodded slowly. The fear didn't vanish, but something stronger settled in its place. Resolve. She realized that silence wouldn't protect her anyway. They would still rewrite her story, still erase her work. The only difference was whether she would be complicit in it. On the morning of the gala, Kyla arrived at the venue early, determined to focus. The building buzzed with controlled chaos, staff rushing, musicians warming up, security tightening. She went straight to her dressing room, wanting one quiet moment before the storm. Her sheet music, meticulously arranged and marked with personal notes, had been left on the table the night before. The table was empty. Her breath caught as she searched the room. The chair, the counter, the floor. Nothing. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. She stepped into the hallway, asking nearby staff if they'd moved it. No one had. No one had seen it. Security was called, but their response was slow, detached. Cameras in the corridor, they said, would need to be reviewed later. Kyla stood alone in the doorway, the weight of it crashing down on her all at once. The threats, the warnings, the pressure, it had all led to this. They hadn't just tried to silence her voice. They had tried to erase her music. With minutes left before showtime, Kyla realizes the only thing she has left is what she carries inside, and the world is about to find out if that's enough. The velvet curtain trembled slightly in the wings, as Kyla stood just behind it, heart hammering in her chest. The soft hum of a live audience drifted through the narrow gap, the sound somehow louder than it should have been, louder because she knew who was out there. Not just strangers or curious spectators, but an entire country's worth of expectations. Politicians, activists, artists, students watching on live streams, and Griffin Leary, seated in the front row, a man who had seen something in her silence no one else bothered to listen to. What they didn't see, what no one knew except Kyla and her mother, was that the sheet music, the carefully annotated, reworked, and memorized piece she had labored over for weeks, was gone, vanished that morning from her dressing room in the gala venue. Denise had stepped out briefly to take a call. Kyla had gone to warm up with the accompanying orchestra, and when she returned, the folder was missing. No one had seen anything. No staff admitted to moving it. The cameras in the hallway? Mysteriously inactive during that time slot. The director offered her blank sympathy, and a weak promise to look into it later. But Kyla didn't scream, didn't accuse. She simply sat down in the corner, stared at the empty folder for several minutes, and then closed her eyes. She already knew what this was. This was Northbridge again. This was institutional silencing, wearing a different dress, and hiding behind better lighting. But this time, there were no curtains to hide behind. No plausible deniability. This was deliberate. This was war. Baby, we can push your slot back if you need to recover the notes. Denise had whispered, her voice gentle but shaking. You don't have to do this without— I'm not pushing it, Kyla interrupted, standing tall. They wanted me to forget it, but they forgot I wrote it. Now backstage, as the MC prepared to announce her, she rubbed her hands together slowly, grounding herself not in confidence but in memory. She'd written the piece from fragments of pain, from the slow-burning fury of being spoken over in classrooms, from the ache of watching people perform diversity like it was a costume. The music was never supposed to be played safely. It was always meant to be— The lights dimmed. The MC's voice cut through the room like silk. Ladies and gentlemen, to close this year's Youth Arts Gala, we present Kyla Monroe, a young composer whose resilience has moved the nation, and whose performance tonight speaks not only to her talent, but to her truth. Applause erupted, distant and thunderous. Kyla stepped onto the stage. She didn't walk like someone afraid. She walked like someone who had already been taken apart, and now refused to come back together the way they wanted. She wore no flashy dress, just a sleek, deep burgundy jumpsuit. Strong, elegant, unapologetically black. Her hair was braided, pulled back from her face, revealing a calm expression that held fire just beneath the surface. As she reached the piano, the camera cranes dipped lower to catch her face. The live stream counter surged, hundreds of thousands watching, some with admiration, some waiting for her to fail. She adjusted the bench slowly, and placed her hands over the keys, There were no pages before her, no cues, no safety net. She began to play. The first chord was quiet, barely audible above the breath of the audience. Not soft from hesitation, but from intimacy. It crept through the room like a memory trying to return. Her fingers moved with steady grace, building on melodies not from paper but from her marrow. It was the same piece, unheard carol, but now it had a different shape, wider, deeper, burning with a new purpose. The violins joined her in perfect harmony. The conductor, having rehearsed the original version, caught her subtle shifts and adjusted accordingly. The cellos swelled, wrapping around her like armor, but it was Kyla's melody that carried everything forward. Sharp, aching, holy, and then the unexpected happened. Halfway through the second movement, Kyla improvised. It wasn't panic. It wasn't mistake. It was defiance made music. She broke from the script she herself had written, allowing her fingers to carve a new language in real time. The structure she had memorized melted into something rawer, something painful and triumphant, all at once. The minor keys dropped heavier, the tempo slowed, then surged like a second heartbeat. In that moment, the audience disappeared. There was no hall, no lights, no pressure, only a black girl at a piano, telling the truth. Griffin Leary had held composure through every performance that evening. Politician speeches, violin solos, choir harmonies. He watched with polite interest. But as Kyla played, he leaned forward slowly, hands pressed together just beneath his chin, his chest rising and falling too fast for someone simply listening. He remembered growing up in silence, sitting at the back of classrooms where teachers called him articulate, like it was a surprise, the way excellence was demanded from him, and then dismissed. He thought he had escaped it. Money, power, position. But tonight, as he watched Kyla remake her stolen melody in front of the nation, he realized he hadn't escaped it. He had only learned how to drown it with volume. Kyla's final note rang out like a bell cracking ice. It didn't end in flourish. It ended in stillness. When she lifted her hands, the room did not erupt. It held its breath. And then, after what felt like a full lifetime of silence, the applause came. It wasn't polite. It wasn't routine. It was seismic. People rose to their feet, stunned, some wiping tears without knowing why. Cameras caught faces crumpling. People mouthing, "Wow," as if reverence were the only language left. Kyla stood, bowed once, and let her gaze fall to the front row. There, Griffin Leary stood frozen. Tears streaked his face openly. No attempt to hide them. No shame. Just a man who knew what it meant to finally be seen through someone else's courage. Denise, backstage, gripped the curtain tightly, breathless with pride. She mouthed a silent thank you to her daughter, to the moment, to the ancestors who carried Kyla here. But the moment was not untouched. Just as Kyla stepped off stage, a staffer ran up, pale and wide-eyed. "We have a problem," he whispered. "What kind of problem?" Kyla asked, still catching her breath. The staffer handed her his phone, showing a notification. A major arts outlet had just published a breaking report. Exclusive, Northbridge High official accuses Kyla Monroe of plagiarism, claims unheard carol not her original composition. Kyla stares at the screen. Beneath the headline is a photo of the white freshman seated at a piano, holding her stolen sheet music. The applause did not arrive all at once. It rolled in layers, like weather crossing a city. First a scattered clapping from those closest to the stage, then a rising swell as people stood instinctively, and finally a roar that seemed to lift the ceiling itself. Kyla remained still for a moment after the last note faded, hands hovering above the keys as if the music might return if she let go too quickly. When she finally stood, the ovation surged louder, fuller, no longer polite or performative, but urgent, grateful, undeniable. The sound washed over her, a physical force, and she felt it in her chest before she understood it in her mind. Faces blurred together under the lights. Some people were smiling through tears. Others stared at her as if trying to memorize the shape of what they had just witnessed. The orchestra members rose with her, bows lifted in respect, but it was Kyla the audience was fixed on. She bowed once, deep, controlled, and lifted her head with a steadiness that had been earned. This wasn't triumph. It was recognition. Backstage, Denise pressed her palm to her mouth, breath caught somewhere between pride and relief. She had watched her daughter walk onto that stage, without armor, without sheet music, without guarantees, and turn vulnerability into command. Denise had known Kyla's talent all her life, but this was different. This was the moment the world met her on her own terms. Griffin Leary clapped until his hands stung. He did not stop when others did. He stood longer than anyone in his row. Jaw tight, eyes bright. He had funded stages, platforms, programs, but he had never witnessed power arrive so unannounced, so uncontainable. He thought of the note Kyla had struck in the middle of the piece, the one that had broken from expectation and refused to return. That was the sound of someone who could not be managed. As the applause finally began to taper, the MC returned to the stage, visibly shaken, voice unsteady, as he thanked Kyla and attempted to transition to closing remarks. But the room wasn't ready to move on. People lingered on their feet. The cameras lingered too. Tight shots of Kyla's face broadcast live, her expression composed but alert, as if she knew something else was coming. A staffer approached Griffin from the aisle, leaning in close to speak. Griffin's posture stiffened. He glanced toward the stage, then toward the exit, then back to the staffer. Now, he asked quietly. The staffer nodded. Griffin exhaled, and nodded once, signaling he understood. Whatever was unfolding, it wasn't part of the program. Kyla felt the shift before she saw it. The energy in the room changed, subtly at first, like a draft. The applause thinned. Conversations sparked in hushed clusters. Phones came out again, not to record her this time, but to check something urgent. She stepped off stage into the wings, where Denise wrapped her in a fierce embrace. You did it, Denise whispered, voice breaking. You heard them. I felt them, Kyla replied. Her hands were still trembling, not from nerves but from the echo of what she had released. Then Jace appeared, breathless, eyes wide. Kyla, he said, holding up his phone. You need to see this. She took it. The headline sat heavy at the top of the screen, bold and immediate, stamped with the credibility of a national outlet. Northbridge High responds to Gala controversy. No evidence of sabotage. Beneath it, a statement attributed to the school district scrolled in sterile language, regret for misinterpretations, insistence on technical variability, and a pointed line about external influence exploiting a student's experience for personal agendas. External influence. Kyla read it again, and again. They're denying everything, Denise said, anger cutting through her voice. After all this, it gets worse, Jace added quietly. He scrolled. Another update loaded beneath the first, published minutes later. School questions authenticity of composition, claims similarities to prior work. Kyla closed her eyes. They were doing it in real time, reframing, muddying, exhausting the truth until it sounded optional. She had expected resistance, but not this speed, this coordination. The applause hadn't even faded, and Northbridge had already moved to reclaim control. Griffin joined them, face set. They've chosen their path, he said. They're betting that confusion will outlast clarity. What do we do? Denise asked. We don't rush, Griffin replied. We document. We wait for the truth to surface fully. And it, as if summoned by his words, a notification buzzed across multiple phones at once. A push alert from a major cable news network. The banner glowed red. Breaking news. Jace read aloud, voice tight. Exclusive report alleges media manipulation behind Kyla Monroe's viral rise. Sources claim parent involvement. Denise's breath caught. What? The article loaded slowly, each second stretching. It cited unnamed sources, suggested coordination, questioned timing, and then halfway down, a photo appeared. Denise outside the Monroe house, days earlier, speaking to a reporter she hadn't even contacted. Her expression captured mid-sentence, and stripped of context. They're accusing me, Denise said, stunned. They're saying I staged this. Kyla felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't about discrediting her performance anymore. This was about discrediting her support system. About isolating her by turning the closest person in her life into a liability. They're trying to split you, Griffin said. Classic move. If they can't break the message, they break the messenger's foundation. Denise straightened, jaw set. I won't apologize for protecting my child. Kyla looked at her mother, then back at the screen, then toward the stage she had just left. The ovation felt like it belonged to another lifetime now. The room buzzed with new tension. Reporters repositioning, producers whispering, the narrative shifting beneath their feet. A producer approached cautiously. We're getting requests, she said. Statements, interviews, clarification. Not yet, Griffin said. We don't feed speculation. Kyla nodded. She felt tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. But beneath the fatigue was something harder, sharper. They had applauded her truth and now they were punishing it. The contrast was almost surgical. As they moved toward a quieter corridor, Kyla's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. Next time we won't miss your mother. Kyla stopped walking. She didn't show the message to anyone. Not yet. She slid the phone into her pocket, lifted her chin and kept moving. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing. Within hours, a primetime segment airs, questioning Denise Monroe's credibility, and Kyla must decide whether to step forward publicly, risking everything, or let the lie harden into history. The smear campaign didn't arrive loudly. It seeped in, polite on the surface, corrosive underneath. By the next morning, Kyla woke to headlines that framed uncertainty as fact, and speculation as balance. Phrases like, questions raised and sources suggest, threaded through articles with surgical precision. Never outright accusing, but always implying. The truth was no longer being argued against. It was being buried under noise. Kyla lay still in bed, phone glowing in the half-dark, watching the narrative mutate in real time. Denise moved through the house with rigid calm, the kind that came from years of holding herself together in spaces that questioned her legitimacy. She answered no calls, read no comments, and made breakfast like any other morning. But Kyla noticed the pauses, how her mother stopped before pouring coffee, how she pressed her lips together before speaking. The accusations weren't just professional, they were personal. They cast Denise not as a parent protecting her child, but as a manipulator orchestrating attention. It was an old story with a familiar target. Hate messages stacked up quickly, their tone emboldened by the suggestion that Kyla's rise was manufactured. Some accused her of being a pawn, others of being ungrateful. A few went further, attacking her intelligence, her appearance, her right to be on that stage at all. Kyla deleted them in batches, but the volume itself was the point to exhaust, to overwhelm, to make silence feel like relief. At Northbridge, the school board announced an independent investigation. The email was carefully worded, emphasizing transparency, while refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing. It framed the inquiry as a response to community concerns, not evidence. The investigation would examine procedures, communications, and student conduct. Kyla read the list twice, and noticed what wasn't there: accountability for sabotage, racial bias, or retaliation. The scope had been drawn to protect the institution, not the truth. Griffin Leary called that afternoon. "They're attempting to launder their intent through bureaucracy," he said. "An investigation that never names the harm will never find it." "What do we do?" Kyla asked. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "We gather facts," he replied. "And we wait for the moment they don't think anyone's listening." That moment came faster than expected. Jace showed up at the Monroe house just before dusk, eyes ringed with exhaustion, backpack slung low. He hadn't slept much. "They locked me out of everything," he said as soon as he stepped inside. "Yearbook servers, tech logs, even my school email." He paused, then added, "But they forgot one thing." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and set it gently on the table. "I started backing things up months ago," he continued. "After the gala, I had a feeling. They always move faster when they think they're being watched, but they get sloppy when they think they're safe." Denise leaned in. Kyla felt her pulse quicken. "What's on it?" "Audio," Jace said. "From the administrative conference room. I used to help with AV setups for board meetings. There's an old system. Auto records for minutes. They don't check it unless someone asks." They plugged the drive into Kyla's laptop. The file name was dated 2 days after the gala. The room filled with the faint hum of an HVAC system. Chairs shifting, papers rustling, voices followed. Familiar ones. Mrs. Lindell spoke first, crisp and assured. She talked about containment and damage control, about reframing the narrative before it solidified into precedent. A male voice, Vice Principal Harrows, mentioned the video, calling it regrettable but manageable. Another voice chimed in, cooler, older, a school board member. He asked whether the student could be disciplined without inflaming activists. Then came the line that changed everything. "We can't let her set the standard," Mrs. Lindell said. "If students learn that public pressure works, we lose control. This needs to be a lesson." Kyla's stomach dropped. Denise closed her eyes. The conversation continued. Colder now. They discussed optics, timing, leveraging policy to justify consequences. Someone suggested questioning authorship of the composition to introduce reasonable doubt. Another suggested focusing on parental involvement. "If we discredit the mother," a voice said, "the story collapses." Silence followed. Then quiet agreement. Kyla reached for the spacebar, stopping the audio. The room felt smaller, heavier. There it was, the intent, unfiltered, Not confusion. Not accident. Strategy. This is it, Jace said quietly. This proves it wasn't just bias. It was coordinated. Denise straightened. They planned to hurt a child to protect their image. Griffin listened to the recording over speaker, jaw tight. When it ended, he didn't speak for several seconds. Then, this changes the game, but it also raises the stakes. Because of retaliation? Kyla asked. Because exposure threatens power, he replied. And power doesn't concede gracefully. They debated next steps late into the night. Lawyers, timing, platforms, whether to release the recording immediately or wait. Kyla felt the weight of the decisions settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about choosing when and how to force the truth into daylight. As they talked, Kyla's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. We know what you found. Be careful how loud you play it. She showed it to the others. No one spoke for a moment. Jace broke the silence. They're listening. Griffin nodded. Which means they're afraid. Denise took Kyla's hands. You don't have to carry this alone. Kyla looked at the flash drive, then at the faces around her. People who had chosen truth over comfort. The fear didn't disappear, but it sharpened, aligning with resolve. She understood now what silence had cost others before her. She also understood what speaking would cost her. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the town in a temporary quiet that hid nothing underneath. Kyla closed the laptop. We release it, she said, but not like they expect. As they prepare to go public, a subpoena arrives ordering Kyla to hand over all recordings and devices by morning. It didn't drop like a bomb. It dropped like truth. Heavy, unignorable, permanent. Griffin Leary's legal team sent the recording to 3 trusted journalists, along with timestamps, verification, and a simple statement. Listen for yourself. By noon, it was everywhere. Cable news played the audio on loop, red banners flashing across the screen. Leaked recording exposes deliberate retaliation by school officials against black student. Radio hosts broke down every line. Podcasts dissected the language. Social media did what it did best, amplified and multiplied, turning the recording into a cultural rupture. In less than 12 hours, the narrative Northbridge had carefully spun collapsed like wet paper. The phrase "this needs to be a lesson" became infamous. Repeated in every headline, quoted in every segment. Hashtags exploded. Not just Kyla. Make them listen. Northbridge unmasked. Public figures weighed in. Activists rallied around it. Even those who had previously been unsure now heard the undeniable proof of intentional silencing. Not speculation, not exaggeration, but strategy. By the time Denise walked into the grocery store that evening, strangers stopped her. Not with side eyes, but with handshakes. You raised her right, one elderly black woman whispered, as she passed, squeezing Denise's arm with a knowing strength. Denise smiled politely, but inside a storm still raged. Vindication did not erase what they'd tried to do to her daughter. It didn't erase the threats. It didn't return the sleepless nights or make the price they'd paid feel fair. Parents began showing up at the Northbridge school board meetings in droves. Some quiet, some furious, some in tears. Alumni wrote open letters demanding resignations. Former students of color began sharing eerily similar stories from years past. Moments dismissed, honors revoked, voices dimmed. Northbridge wasn't just facing scandal. It was facing a reckoning. Still, Kyla didn't celebrate. She watched it unfold from her bedroom. Blanket wrapped around her knees, the laptop screen casting cold light across her face. The world finally heard what she'd lived. But it didn't bring peace. It brought weight. Everyone wanted her next move. News crews waited outside. Producers sent appearance offers. Even a documentary filmmaker reached out. They're trying to shape your story, while it's still happening, Jace told her. They want closure, not justice. He was right. But Kyla wasn't ready to give either. Griffin's team handled the legal front. Within a day, a civil rights organization filed a formal complaint against the school board. The Department of Education requested preliminary transcripts of the investigation. Pressure mounted fast, and publicly. Then came the announcement. Principal Robert Hardwick had been placed on administrative leave. Effective immediately, the school issued a statement full of deflections. Pending review, commitment to student safety, temporary restructuring. But the damage had been done. Northbridge's leadership was now visibly fractured. Mrs. Lindell was notably absent from all responses. Rumors swirled that she had stepped back voluntarily, but insiders suggested something else. She had lawyered up. Kyla sat with Denise and Griffin in their living room. The energy cautious but different. Something had cracked open, and they all felt it. Denise turned to her daughter. You shook the ground beneath them. I didn't mean to, Kyla murmured. But you needed to, Griffin replied. Sometimes survival isn't quiet. Sometimes it roars. The world roared back. For a few days, it felt like momentum. Even the Scholarship Foundation, that once threatened to revoke Kyla's funding, issued a clarification, reaffirming their commitment to her education, and subtly backpedaling from previous language. Apologies poured in, some sincere, others performative. Either way, it was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was power. But Kyla still didn't sleep well. The nights were heavy with what-ifs. She dreamed of the spotlight shutting off again, of empty stages, of playing music that no one could hear. It wasn't over. She could feel that, and she was right. 2 mornings after the principal was placed on leave, Kyla opened her front door to find a package sitting neatly on the porch. No label, no return address, just her name, typed in bold on a white envelope taped to the top. Inside, a single printed photo. It showed her sitting at her piano at home, practicing, alone. The angle was from outside the window. Underneath the photo, a typed message: you exposed one system, but others are still watching. Don't forget who's writing your future. Kyla froze. Her fingers clenched the edge of the paper. Denise, hearing the stillness, entered the room. She took one look at the photo and didn't say a word. She simply reached for her phone and called Griffin. The escalation wasn't random, it was tactical. They're not just angry you spoke, Griffin said over speaker. They're terrified that you'll keep speaking, that this will spread. Is this still Northbridge? Denise asked. Griffin paused. Maybe not just Northbridge. When you touch institutional rot, it doesn't stay localized. Kyla stared at the image again. Her heart thudded in her ears, not from fear but from something else. A realization. Her performance had become more than music. It had become threat. Not because of volume, but because of clarity. They couldn't bury what had been hurt, so now they wanted to scare her into silence. She looked up at Denise. We release everything. All of it? Denise asked gently. All of it. Kyla nodded. Not just about me. About the system. The recordings. The files. The patterns. The other students. Griffin hesitated. That's going to make a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable. I'm tired of being the one who's uncomfortable, Kyla replied. It's their turn. That night, an email arrives from a former Northbridge staff member, with an encrypted link labeled only you don't know the whole story. The hearing room was colder than it looked on the live stream. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the polished wooden floor echoed every shuffle, every nervous cough. Rows of cameras stood at the back wall, their red lights blinking steadily, waiting to capture every syllable, every pause. And at the center of it all, in a simple black blazer and jeans, Kyla Monroe sat behind a microphone that was finally turned on. She hadn't asked for this invitation. It came from the State Board of Education after public pressure, legal momentum, and national outcry forced officials to acknowledge what Northbridge tried to bury. They titled the hearing Investigating Equity and Student Voice in Public Schools, but everyone in the room knew it was about her, and everyone was watching to see if she'd flinch. Kyla glanced at the prepared remarks in front of her, printed neatly and held together with a single paperclip. Her hand hovered over them. Then she slowly folded the pages closed and pushed them aside. No script. She raised her eyes to meet the board. My name is Kyla Monroe, she began. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. I'm a student, a daughter, a musician, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard, stayed quiet, and did things the right way, I'd earn my place. A pause. Small, necessary. But what I've learned, what a lot of students like me learn, is that there are people and systems designed to make sure that place stays out of reach. Not with violence, but with silence. With policies that sound neutral but aren't. With teachers who smile but never see you. With institutions that punish you, not for failing but for being excellent in a way they didn't plan for. The room was completely still. Kyla continued, her voice gaining depth with each sentence. At my school, I wasn't ignored because I lacked talent. I was ignored because the system wasn't built to celebrate students like me. And when I was finally seen, when my music reached people, it wasn't applause I got. It was threats, sabotage, suspension, character assassination. Not because I broke the rules, but because I broke their version of the story. Her hands gripped the edge of the table lightly, grounding herself in the moment. They called me disruptive, But I wasn't disrupting learning. I was disrupting comfort. I was reminding them that their power wasn't neutral, that their decisions had weight, and that students notice who gets protected and who gets punished. Kyla glanced toward the press, knowing every word would ripple far beyond the room. I'm not here to ask for pity, or to tell you I'm brave. I'm here to ask why it took a viral video, national attention, and a leaked recording for the truth to be taken seriously. And how many other students didn't go viral? How many stories never made it out of the classroom? One of the board members leaned forward slightly. Another removed their glasses, eyes heavy with something that resembled guilt. Kyla's voice softened. I've heard people say that what happened to me was an exception. But what if I'm not the exception? What if I'm just the one you couldn't ignore? Silence again, the kind that spoke volumes. She finished quietly. If you want to talk about equity, then you need to start by listening when power is uncomfortable. And when students raise their voices, not because they want fame, but because they've been denied fairness, you should ask yourselves why it took them so long to be heard. She sat back. For a moment, the board was still processing. Then came the applause. Not from the officials, but from the back of the room. Parents, teachers, students. Some were crying. Others stood. It wasn't a performance. It was a release. Griffin, seated 2 rows behind, allowed himself a long breath. Denise wiped her eyes silently. Jace, watching from a live stream at home, texted only 3 words. You did that. The hearing adjourned without dramatic announcements. But later that afternoon, the board issued a statement. The State Department of Education would begin a formal, statewide investigation into racial bias and systemic exclusion in public school programming, starting with Northbridge. It was a beginning, not a solution. But for once it didn't feel performative. That evening Kyla sat in her room replaying her own words, not because she doubted them, but because for the first time they existed in a place where they couldn't be erased. The email from the former staff member still sat unopened in her inbox. The subject line, "You don't know the whole story." And though the world was finally listening, Kyla knew the truth ran deeper. She clicked the link. The video opens on Mrs. Lindell, secretly recorded, boasting at a private donor party about filtering out the students who didn't represent the school's image. The apology arrived wrapped in ceremony, polished and rehearsed, delivered at a podium flanked by school district banners that suddenly emphasized words like equity, healing, and moving forward. Miss Lindell stood beneath those banners with a posture that suggested dignity, though the weight in her shoulders betrayed the truth. She was no longer the confident architect of Northbridge's traditions. She was a liability now, recently terminated, carefully distanced from the institution she had served for decades. Her voice trembled just enough to sound human. She spoke of missteps, of unintended harm, of learning moments. She never used the word racism. She never named Kyla. Instead, she framed everything as a failure of communication. An unfortunate misunderstanding magnified by social media. Cameras clicked. Reporters nodded. The apology was consumed exactly as it was designed to be. Quickly, conveniently, and without demand for depth. Kyla watched the live stream from her living room. Legs pulled up beneath her. Expression unreadable. Denise sat beside her. Arms folded tightly. Eyes fixed on the screen. Neither spoke. They had learned that silence, when chosen, could be louder than argument. When the press conference ended, the district released a statement thanking Mrs. Lindell for her years of service and reaffirming its commitment to inclusive excellence. It was corporate language, smooth and sanitized, the kind meant to close a chapter without reading it aloud. But privately, the tone was very different. Emails flooded Kyla's inbox, messages from administrators who had never learned how to pronounce her name correctly. From teachers who had once praised her quietly but never defended her publicly. They spoke of regret now, of wishing they had done more, of hoping she understood that times were different and systems were complicated. Some asked for forgiveness, others asked for collaboration, a few asked for silence in exchange for opportunity. Kyla read them all. She responded to none. The offers came next. The school board requested a private meeting, framing it as a path toward reconciliation. They suggested restoring Kyla's standing, lifting the suspension officially, and even nominating her for a district-wide arts recognition. The implication was clear: public peace in exchange for quiet cooperation. Griffin Leary listened as Kyla recounted the proposals. They want absolution without transformation, he said. That's not accountability. That's damage control. Still, the pressure was relentless. Editorials began urging Kyla to accept the apology and move on. Commentators praised her maturity while subtly suggesting that continued resistance might appear ungrateful. The public loved redemption arcs, especially when they didn't require systemic change. One evening, Kyla received a call she hadn't expected. Mrs. Lindell herself. The line was quiet for a moment before Lindell spoke. "I wanted to apologize directly," she said, voice low, stripped of performance. "Not as an administrator, as a person." Kyla didn't respond right away. She waited. "I know what I did looks bad now," Lindell continued. "But you have to understand the pressure we're under. Donors, expectations, tradition. We were protecting the school." "No," Kyla said calmly. "You were protecting power." Silence stretched between them. "I never thought it would go this far," Lindell said finally. You didn't think I'd be heard," Kyla finished. "That's the difference." The call ended without resolution. Kyla set her phone down gently, as if it might shatter if handled too roughly. Denise exhaled slowly. "You didn't owe her anything." "I know," Kyla said, "but I needed to hear her say it." As weeks passed, Northbridge worked hard to rebrand itself. New committees were announced. Diversity consultants were hired. Hallway posters appeared celebrating inclusion, faces smiling brightly beneath slogans that rang hollow to those who knew the truth. The institution was learning how to apologize without changing its spine, and yet something unexpected happened. Students began stopping Kyla in public spaces, not to ask for autographs or photos, but to thank her. A black sophomore told her she'd started auditioning again. A Latino senior said he'd finally reported the counselor who discouraged him from applying to competitive colleges. Parents wrote letters describing how their children saw school differently now, not as a place where silence was safety, but where voice could matter. Those moments grounded Kyla more than any award ever could. Then came the invitation. An official envelope arrived one afternoon, embossed with the Northbridge crest. Inside, a formal letter informed Kyla that the school would be honored to welcome her back as the featured performer at the next holiday gala. They praised her talent, acknowledged past miscommunications, and emphasized the opportunity to heal together as a community. At the bottom of the page, in smaller print, were the conditions. The performance would need to be pre-approved. The piece selected by committee. Public statements coordinated through the district's communications office. The offer wasn't about celebration. It was about control, reclaiming the narrative on their stage, under their rules. Kyla stared at the letter for a long time. The irony was sharp enough to taste. They had ignored her when she needed space, silenced her when she spoke, punished her when she was seen, and now, stripped of credibility and exposed, they wanted her back, not as herself but as a symbol they could manage. Denise read the letter once and set it down. "They're asking you to perform forgiveness." Griffin was more direct. "They want your silence dressed as unity." That night, Kyla sat alone at her piano. She didn't play, she just rested her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar weight beneath her fingers. The music had always been honest with her, even when people weren't. She thought about the girl she had been before the gala, the one who believed excellence would speak for itself. She thought about the girl she was now, carrying stories that refused to stay quiet. The offer was tempting. Closure, visibility, a chance to return on her own terms, or at least the illusion of it. But Kyla knew better now. She knew what it cost to accept an apology without accountability. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jace. "They're already planning the gala press release, with or without you." Kyla smiled faintly. She picked up the letter again, folded it carefully, and placed it on the piano bench. The decision wasn't immediate, but it was forming. The next morning, Kyla receives an email from a national youth empowerment tour, offering her a stage far bigger than Northbridge ever imagined. The email arrived in the early hours, just as dawn began to stretch its pale light across Kyla's bedroom wall. It had no subject line, just the name of the sender, National Youth Empowerment Tour Committee. At first she thought it was another generic support message, or another vague offer from someone trying to ride the wave of her story. But the moment she opened it, she knew this was different. They had seen her hearing, heard her words, watched her perform without permission and speak without apology. And they didn't want her to play in a gymnasium under supervision. They wanted her to headline a national tour, 12 cities, thousands of students, a series of arenas and theaters where young voices led the conversation, where artists, poets, survivors, and changemakers from across the country would gather to tell stories that the world once tried to quiet. And at the center of the opening night in Chicago, they wanted Kyla. Not because she was a victim, Because she was undeniable. She stared at the screen, blinking once, then twice. Her heart didn't race. It pulsed steady, as if her body understood something before her mind caught up. Denise entered the room quietly, carrying a mug of tea, still dressed in her soft robe. "You're up early." Kyla turned the screen to face her. "They want me. The tour." Denise read the email in silence. When she finished, her lips parted slightly. "This is real," she whispered. Kyla nodded. "Do you want to do it?" Denise asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked past the screen, beyond the four walls that had both protected and confined her over the last few months. Her eyes settled on the folded letter still sitting on the piano bench. The Northbridge invitation, wrapped in conditions and cloaked in manipulation. "I want to play," Kyla said slowly. "But not for them. Not on their terms." Later that day, she drafted a response to Northbridge. No anger, no demands, just clarity. "Thank you for the invitation. I respectfully decline. I will not be returning to the gala. The stage I needed doesn't exist within your institution. But I'm building one that does." She sent it without rereading. It felt like an exhale she had been holding for months. The backlash from the school came quickly. Statements laced with disappointment, articles speculating whether she was squandering a chance at unity, even whispers among some parents about ingratitude. But for every critic, there were dozens more who celebrated her decision. Students began posting videos playing her music. Alumni created a fund in her name for future students of color pursuing the arts. And everywhere she looked, her refusal echoed louder than any apology Northbridge had given. The tour organizers moved quickly. Within a week, Kyla had a travel itinerary, rehearsal schedules, and a creative team dedicated to helping her shape her performance. But they didn't tell her what to say or what to play. Instead, they asked, "What does the world need to hear?" She decided not to just perform music. She would tell the story too. But not the viral version, not the neat, packaged arc people preferred. She would tell them about the silence before the applause. The cameras that captured pain but not process. The teachers who watched injustice and stayed seated. The students who spoke up and paid the price. The mother who became collateral damage. And the child who played through it all. Not for praise, but because it was the only way to stay whole. Opening night arrived sooner than expected. The Chicago theater buzzed with energy, sold out and brimming with young faces. Some determined, some scared, many unsure of what they were walking into. Kyla stood behind the curtain, hands shaking slightly, not from fear but from the sheer weight of how far she had come. Griffin Leary was backstage, arms folded, eyes proud. "They'll hear you," he said softly. "On your terms." She stepped into the light. The stage was vast. The spotlight, this time, didn't flicker. The microphone didn't cut out. And when her fingers touched the piano, the first note rang clear and strong. She played with memory. She spoke with fire, and when the final note dropped, followed by a full minute of silence, the applause didn't come with confusion. It came with thunder. No one asked for proof. No one questioned her path. They simply stood and listened. Afterward, as she exited into the hallway behind the curtain, a producer from the tour approached, phone in hand, blinking in disbelief. "Kyla," she said, "you need to see this." The producer handed her the phone. An email from a name she didn't recognize at first. James Delancey, a Hollywood director, acclaimed award-winning, known for biopics that reshaped conversations. He had watched the hearing, the viral clips, and now her performance, and he wasn't interested in exploiting the story. He wanted to collaborate. He wanted to make a film, but only if Kyla wanted it told, only if she had full control. Kyla stared at the screen, then back at the room behind her, where students still waited to meet her, hug her, ask her how she did it. Her silence had once been weaponized. Now her voice was writing the blueprint. Kyla agrees to meet with Delancey, but at their first lunch he shows her a script already in development, based on a version of her life she doesn't recognize. The snow was falling lightly over the city, dusting sidewalks and window ledges, like it had the night Kyla first stepped onto that sabotaged stage. But this December felt different. The cold no longer clung like tension. It whispered closure. Growth. Proof that winter, for all its stillness, didn't kill everything. Some things bloomed through the frost. Kyla stood outside the tall glass building downtown, wearing a deep emerald coat and holding a simple square package wrapped in black with a single gold ribbon. No cameras followed her this time. No press, no statements, just her and a gift. Inside the top floor of the building, through floor-to-ceiling windows, the holiday gala of a very different kind was underway. Not Northbridge, not staged, This was the annual charity fundraiser, hosted by Griffin Leary's Foundation, an event that now prioritized youth voices, equity and justice, not as buzzwords, but as pillars. Kyla entered quietly, weaving through conversations and laughter. She wasn't performing tonight. She wasn't scheduled, highlighted, or announced. She didn't need to be. Griffin spotted her before she reached him. The billionaire tech mogul who had once been the only adult in a room full of denial, the man who offered her a microphone when her school yanked it away, stood frozen for a second, his eyes filling faster than he probably would have liked. He set his drink down and stepped toward her with reverence instead of fanfare. "Kyla," he said, voice soft with disbelief. She smiled. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." From beneath her arm she lifted the wrapped package and handed it to him. He hesitated before opening it, perhaps sensing that it was more than a gift. And it was. Inside, a matte black vinyl sleeve, embossed with a minimalist gold design. In simple centered letters, it read, "You and Heard No More." Her first full-length album, written, produced, and arranged by Kyla Monroe. A body of work born not from the scars of a broken system, but from the strength it failed to suppress. Griffin ran his fingers over the title like it might vanish if touched too quickly. "This is yours?" he asked. She nodded. "The first copy. Pressed this morning." He opened the sleeve and pulled out the record, revealing a handwritten note on the back cover. "To the man who amplified what they tried to erase. This music was never meant to be silent. Thank you for helping me hear myself again." His eyes didn't tear, they spilled. He looked away quickly, wiping under his glasses, clearing his throat. "I don't deserve this," he said. "No," Kyla replied softly. "You didn't wait to." She could see it in his face, the years he'd spent navigating boardrooms and battlegrounds, trying to bend the world toward fairness without breaking its fragile structures. And for the first time it was clear someone had shown him that power didn't have to be protected. It could be shared. The room quieted as the event's MC approached the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced. "A quick update to tonight's program." Kyla froze slightly, eyebrows raised. "We've just received a surprise donation and dedication from a very special guest." Griffin turned to her, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Don't look at me." Kyla stepped back as the crowd shifted, parting slightly. The MC continued. "This evening our scholarship fund will officially launch the Kyla Monroe Initiative, a national fund for underrepresented student artists facing systemic bias in education. The foundation will match all donations, and Kyla has agreed to let us name it after her, though we only just told her." Laughter rippled across the room, warm and affectionate. Kyla's throat tightened. She had walked into this night expecting a private moment, and now her name was being spoken, not in pity, not in defense, but in pride. Griffin turned to her again. "Your legacy started with a song. Now it's a stage." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was intimate. It didn't erupt. It enveloped. Later that night, Kyla sat alone in a quiet corner of the building, watching the snow pile against the city glass. She wasn't tired. She was still, settled, not in the sense of being finished, but in knowing she had no more to prove. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Jace. The documentary just dropped. 2M views in 30 minutes. She smiled, placing the phone face down on the table. The story had outgrown her. It had entered the bloodstream of culture, not as a scandal, but as a shift. Her silence, once used to push her to the margins, had become a chorus behind movements. Her name, once ignored, now introduced other voices. Her music, once unplugged, now echoed in spaces where it had never been allowed before, and it would keep echoing. As she rose to leave, she passed the stage at the center of the gala. A small piano sat there, untouched tonight. She ran her fingers lightly along its frame, then paused, considering for a moment. But no, she had already played the song they needed. This wasn't her performance. It was her echo. As Kyla steps into the snowy night, her phone lights up again. An invite to perform at the United Nations Youth Summit. But this time, not just as a pianist, but as a keynote speaker. If you believe no child should have to fight just to be seen, type yes in the comments. What would you have done if Kyla was your daughter, your sister, or your student? Subscribe to hear more voices that were once silenced and need to be heard now, more than ever. Because when we listen, we don't just change stories, we change systems.